Hi all, Lee here. So the guitar's almost finished. I've already put some strings on, it's under tension. I've already done some basic setup, but what I'll do is I'll just take you through the steps that I take to set the guitar up. Obviously one of the first things you need to choose are what gauge of strings you want, because there will be some slight differences with the amount of pressure that's put onto the neck once it's strung. This particular guitar has 10s on it because that's what I had available. So let's just go through some of the steps I've taken so far. First of all, I've already screwed the strap locks in. I'll show you that. I did record that, so I'll show you after this little piece. But the next thing to do is just some of the different components and what order that I do the setup to try and make everything work and get all the intonation correct, the height of the strings to the fretboard, so on and so forth. So let's crack on and I'll show you what I've done. So before I tightened the strings, the first thing I did was actually pre-tension the truss rod slightly backwards. So not much, just to take the slack out of the truss rod. You twist it just to put a bit of back tension on there, and then you can tighten the strings up to tuning. It's just standard tuning on this guitar. Once that's done, what you might find is you do actually have a little bit of forward bow because of the strength of the strings, and especially with 10s or even 11s, because it's putting so much pressure on the neck, you will probably find you have a bit of forward bow in the neck. So of course the first thing to do is actually check that with a straight edge, and it is, as the way I do it is I just have a known flat ruler which I've measured against a flat surface, so I know that this ruler is perfectly flat and straight. I just put it on the middle to start with, and then my tip for just double checking whether there's a bow in there is I take a small piece of paper, I slide the paper under the strings and I run it across every fret underneath the ruler. And of course, if the paper catches and it doesn't go through underneath the ruler, the straight edge, then I know that it's level. What you'll find is if you have a bit of front bow, these the first and the last frets will actually catch the paper, but as you come down, you'll find that the paper actually fits underneath the ruler across all of the frets because it's been bowed slightly. So if that's the case, as you can see here, I've already adjusted it and the paper is catching and not going underneath the ruler. So if you do have a bow and that paper just runs freely underneath, then you get your truss rod adjustment, you put that in and you just very gently tighten it and put a little bit of back flex on the neck just to settle the truss rod a bit more backwards, and you keep doing that until your piece of paper will not run under any of the frets anymore, and that means you know you then have your neck straight again. So that's how I do that. Of course, you also want to double check the edges as well, and just make fine adjustments to the truss rod until you've got everything as level as you can possibly be and all of the frets are pretty much touching the ruler. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's the first step. Get the truss rod adjusted perfectly with the guitar under tension. The next thing I do is put the nut in and file the nut down to height. Obviously, the nut will probably need a bit of adjustment because I use hand tools, remember. I don't have any CNC machine to make perfect cuts every time. So I make a cut for the nut. I put the nut in and then I just use some files. These are very small files, hopefully you can see that, of different sizes. And I just file down each of the nut slots, one string at a time, until I get a nice height. and the height I get is probably around 1 millimetre or so off the top of the first fret. You don't want to go too low, at least on the low E string, because when the string vibrates in the middle of the string, it vibrates enough that it might actually touch around the 12th fret, which is obviously the halfway mark of the string. So you want to be a little bit careful with the low E string. You don't want to get it too low, and keep checking by playing the guitar to make sure there's no fret rub on there. Otherwise you've gone too low with that nut. But this one is pretty good. At the first fret it's around, I guess, about 1 millimetre high. And it's looking pretty good. The neck's bolted in nice and straight. So looking at it, I think my action looks about 2 to 3 millimetres at the 24th fret, which might be a little high, but I can adjust that later. The reason you want to do the nut first is when you try to set your intonation, you've got to remember when you're pressing down on the strings, the higher the strings are from the fretboard, you're actually changing the tone because you're bending the string and putting it under more tension with the force of you trying to press it against the fret. So I hope that makes sense. It's highly important you get your nut adjusted and your saddle's adjusted to a rough height before you do your intonation, because the mere force of pressing the string down, mainly at the 12th fret, because that's where you can set your intonation, that force can actually change the pitch of the string slightly higher, so it'll feel like it's never in tune. Hopefully that makes sense. I've done this one, I'm pretty happy with it so far. So the next thing is just micro adjustments of the saddle height, because I was already quite happy with the height of the strings across the length of the neck. So let's take a look at that. So on here, a lot of the bridges you buy now already have some basic setup for height and intonation. So it's just fine adjustments on this because I'm pretty happy with the dimensions, and I've really got the 25-inch scale length almost spot on. So I'm quite happy with where the bridge is in my overall design. So it was just a few micro adjustments just to get this intonated correctly. So how do you do the intonation? So to do the fine adjustment on the intonation, you obviously need your tuner. So you plug your tuner in. What you're trying to do is keep the 12th fret will be slightly out of tune to the bridge if the intonation is off. So what you'd do is you would set your string to the note it's supposed to be, so low E in this example. Then you gently press the string down on the 12th fret, you play again, and your tuner should register the next E in the octave. And if it's slightly higher or lower, you need to move the saddle forwards or backwards to account for that difference. Once you get it dead on E, both in the open string and at the 12th fret, and it's dead on E, that's the intonation set correctly. And you do that for each string. I like to do it again with everything under tension. So I would leave the other strings at correct tension and adjust one string at a time using whatever mechanisms on the saddle. On these, it's quite simple. There's two small grub screws to adjust the height of the string from the fretboard. You may need to do that. Mine's looking pretty good, so I'm not going to do too many adjustments on there. But the main one is I have a small locking screw here, and you loosen that locking screw, and then in the back of the saddle is another screw that will pull the saddle backwards and forwards to adjust the intonation. So that's all I've done, and this is looking and sounding pretty good. So I've pretty much done the intonation, everything's dead on. I'm pretty happy with the height of the strings. I may be able to take this down a little bit more on the action by maybe 1/4 of a mil or 1/2 millimetre or so. But I don't mind a slightly higher or average action. But you can keep doing the adjustments as much as you like to get it correct. I'm more of a traditionalist. I like an average height action. It offers good bending, it's still easy to play, and everything's set up nicely with absolutely no string buzz across there. So this is it, the completed guitar. I'm really happy with it. There's a few adjustments I want to make to the final design. Like I say, this is a prototype. I'm hoping that I can hand build and sell some of these. So I will be setting up things like Instagram and other social media to try and start putting the word out. But I will make another video. Obviously, I want to finish on a video that showcases the sound. Now, I'm a useless guitarist, very basic, but I do have a musician friend who said he would play it in front of the camera just so you can get a better idea of what it sounds like. So I'll make another video showcasing the sound of this. I also want to do a final video on all of the changes I'm going to make to this for the final design, and then I'm going to build the number 1 guitar, and I'll make a completely separate video for that. But for now, I'll see you later. Cheers.